Die Zeit wird alle Spuren verwischen. Aber das werde ich zu verhindern wissen. Bin ich doch der Einzige, der es vollbringen kann. Er war mir Gönner und Freund. Und es muss meine heilige Pflicht sein, diesen Großen seiner Zeit nicht dem Vergessen anheimzugeben. Viele Jahre sind seit dem denkwürdigen Weihnachtstag vergangen, an dem Karl, mein König, im heiligen Rom zum Kaiser gekrönt wurde.
When Charlemagne was crowned emperor on the 25th of December 800, he was at the peak of his power. He ruled a realm that encompassed almost the whole of Europe. Charlemagne was the most powerful ruler of his time. Even the Pope in Rome was intimidated by him. Only one person can tell the story of Charlemagne's life firsthand, namely his former comrade-in-arms, the court scholar Einhard.
Verzeiht, Meister, ich bin zu spät.
Noch nicht einmal die Stunden kennst du. Ich frage mich, Johannes, ob du der Aufgabe gewachsen bist, die ich dir zugedacht habe. Ich habe mir vorgenommen, so kurz wie möglich über das private und öffentliche Leben und natürlich auch über die Taten des trefflichen und hochberühmten Königs Karl zu berichten. 20 Jahre habe ich bei ihm am Hof verbracht, habe sein Vertrauen gewonnen und seine Geheimnisse zu wahren gelernt. Aber merke dir, über alles, was nicht zur Niederschrift kommt, hast du zu schweigen.
Ja, Meister Einhard. Wenn es euer Wille ist, sagt mir, was ich schreiben soll.
Das Werk soll benannt werden Vita Caroli, das Leben Karls.
Years after Charlemagne's death, his court scholar Einhard wrote the most famous medieval biography of a ruler. It depicts Charlemagne as superhuman, as a being of light. But was he really like that? What's myth and what's reality? This story starts in turbulent times. Pepin, Charlemagne's father, wanted to be king of the Franks, but without having inherited the crown.
Es wird schon hell. Ihr habt die ganze Nacht gewacht, Herr.
The ambitious Pepin was hoping for a son in order to be able to found a dynasty.
Es ist ein Junge.
When the longed-for son and heir was born in April 748, 4 years had passed since his marriage to Bertrada.
Bring deinem Herrn die Nachricht.
She became very anxious after her marriage that she didn't conceive a child. And her whole position, of course, not to mention her husband's position, depended on having a child and having a boy child. She prayed rather desperately to become fertile, to become pregnant. And she did then have Charlemagne. And I think the relief that she must have felt at that moment was extraordinary.
Herr, es ist ein gesunder, hübscher Junge.
Jetzt beginnt meine und eure Zukunft. Mein Sohn soll auf den Namen Karl getauft werden, wie mein Vater. Und er wird einer der Großen werden.
Heil und Gottes Segen. auf den kommenden König.
The realm of the Franks, which consisted of many small principalities, had been governed by the Merovingians for generations. But Charlemagne's father, Pepin, had good arguments with which he persuaded the princes to venture a revolution under his leadership. Pepin wanted to rule a huge realm. Under the Merovingian dynasty, the territory of the Franks had steadily expanded. In addition to the original settlement areas on the Rhine and the Moselle, large parts of modern-day France had also been incorporated. Over the course of 3 centuries, the Frankish Empire had become a major power in Central Europe.
Aus Neustrin kommt die Nachricht, dass auch in Burgund und Alemannien sich ein großer Teil der Fürsten auf Pippins Seite schlagen werden.
Ich danke euch, dass ihr so schnell kommen konntet. Die Überläufer formieren sich zu einer großen Gruppe. Es sind nur noch wenige, die König Hilderich auch weiter folgen wollen. Bald wird niemand mehr meinen Triumph aufhalten. Aber nur ein mächtiger Verbündeter an meiner Seite wird alle Gegner zum Schweigen bringen. Abt Fulrad, Abt Burkhard, seid ihr bereit für eine Mission nach Rom?
The Pope was to tip the scales in Pepin's favour. Pepin wanted the revolution to take place with his blessing.
Mein lieber Abt Fulrad, Abt Burkhard. Nun, nach reiflicher Überlegung habe ich für die Zukunft des Frankenreichs also folgende Entscheidung getroffen. Es ist besser, dass der König heißt, der die Macht hat, als der, dem keinerlei königliche Gewalt mehr verblieben ist. Daher soll Kraft apostolischer Autorität der Hausmeier Pippin nun König der Franken werden.
Eure Heiligkeit, ihr habt für das Wohl der Franken entschieden und sicherlich nicht zu eurem Schaden.
Der Papst in Rom.
The Pope in Rome had become a highly visible authority in the Frankish Empire. Pepin seems to have had the need to get a legitimation beyond that of the Frankish nobility and the Frankish bishops, in order to strengthen his political ambitions. And so he didn't have much of an option. Turning to the Pope was the obvious choice.
So wurde also auf Geheiß des römischen Papstes Karls Vater Pippin zum neuen König der Franken erhoben. Dem letzten merowingischen Herrscher ließ Pippin den Kopf scheren und verbannte ihn auf Lebenszeit in ein Kloster. Und nun schreib weiter, Johannes. Dem alten König war zuvor sowieso nichts anderes übrig geblieben, als sich mit seinem Titel zu begnügen und mit wallendem Haupthaar und ungeschnittenem Bart auf dem Thron zu sitzen und den Herrscher zu spielen. Pippin sollte auch weiterhin mit großem Geschick vorgehen. Er versprach dem Papst, Rom gegen alle Feinde zu verteidigen. Und so wurde er zum Schutzherrn der Kirche. Im Gegenzug empfingen er, sein Sohn Karl und sein zweitgeborener Sohn, den er Karlmann nannte, die päpstliche Königssalbung.
The new Carolingian dynasty now had 2 heirs to the throne, Charlemagne and his brother Carloman. Even as adolescents, they saw themselves more as rivals than brothers.
Hört sofort auf damit!
The younger and cunning Carloman often had the upper hand in contests. That must have been humiliating for Charlemagne.
Ich habe euch hier versammelt, damit ihr Zeugen meines letzten Willens werdet. Das Frankenreich will ich gerecht unter meinen beiden Söhnen aufteilen. Ich bitte euch, seid ihnen genauso treu ergeben, wie ihr es mir gewesen seid. Ich bestimme also. Du, Karl, du sollst im Norden von Neustrien und Austrien und im westlichen Aquitanien herrschen. Dir, mein geliebter Sohn, schreibe ich den Osten von Aquitanien, Burgund, die Provence, Alemannien und den Süden von Neustrien und Austrien zu. Dieser Beschluss ist unumstößlich.
At first glance, the division of the empire seems balanced. Nevertheless, Charlemagne must have felt at a disadvantage. His section stretched around that of his brother in a semicircle, and that meant significantly longer distances.
The division of the empire that Pepin devised for his sons is strange, because it's not geographically coherent. Charlemagne's territories surrounded Carloman's in a semicircle, and both of them got a portion of Aquitaine, which had been a very sought-after area since the time of the Merovingians. One reason for this strange division was definitely that Pepin wanted to force his sons to get along. But that's exactly what they were unwilling and unable to do. They had a clear rivalry about being the more dominant ruler in the empire.
The tombs of the Frankish kings are in the famous Basilica of Saint-Denis. Charlemagne's father, Pepin, was also buried here next to his wife, Bertrada. When he divided the empire between his sons, he couldn't have suspected what consequences this would have.
So übernahm nach Pippins Tod jeder das Gebiet des Reiches, das ihm durch väterlichen Beschluss zugefallen war. Stell dir vor, an ein und demselben Tag fanden die Krönungen statt. Aber jeder der Brüder hatte dafür eine Kirche in seinem eigenen Reichsteil gewählt. Und dann, tja, der Friede zwischen den beiden konnte nur mit größter Schwierigkeit aufrechterhalten werden. Schon kurz nach den Krönungsfeierlichkeiten war der Streit um die Vorherrschaft zwischen ihnen entbrannt. Und waren es nicht auch die Frauen, die geschickt begannen, Zwietracht zu säen?
Dieser Spann und die Langobardin auf meiner Seite. Das wird mein Reich stellen. Ich gebe euch bald Nachricht.
Geh mit Gottes Segen, mein Sohn.
Was gab es denn so Wichtiges zu besprechen, dass sich mein Bruder sogar eher bemüht?
Sei nicht feindselig, Karl. Und lass dir gesagt sein. Selbst wenn du König bist, ist die Macht noch nicht auf deiner Seite.
Mit dir an meiner Seite, Mutter, habe ich doch meinen kleinen Bruder nicht zu fürchten.
Ich werde zu dir stehen, wie ich es immer getan habe. Aber unterstütze deinen Bruder nicht. Er hat starke Verbündete.
Relations between royal princes were always likely to be tense and difficult. But in this case, the evidence is very clear that that was so. And I wonder if it went back to this special feeling that she had for her eldest boy. She certainly tried to make peace between her two sons when it became clear after their father's death that they weren't getting on very well. But I think the one that she preferred was Charles.
Mein König. Ein Thronfolger stünde dir wahrlich gut zu Passe. Es wäre doch eine Schande, würde dein Bruder in diesen Dingen schneller sein als du. Ich habe spannende Neuigkeiten. Nach allem, was ich weiß, wird auch Karlmann bald eine Gemahlin an seiner Seite haben. Das Gemach teilt sie schon mit ihm.
Sei still. Mach dir darum keine Gedanken mehr.
Herr! Ich war bis kurz vor Dualif, aber von der Armee eures Bruders ist weit und breit keine Spur zu sehen. Mein Pferd!
There was a rebellion on the Empire's borders. In such an event, the plan was for the two brothers to combine their military efforts. Aquitaine, which had been conquered by King Pepin, was rebelling against the Frankish occupiers under its former ruler Hunald. 500 kilometers from the heart of the crisis, Charlemagne was expecting his brother in Moncontour to go to battle with him against Aquitaine. But Carloman didn't show up at the agreed meeting place.
Ohne euren militärischen Beistand wird euer Bruder gegen Hunald ins offene Messer rennen.
Das ist der Plan. Er wird alleine ziehen. Es gebietet ihm schon seine Ehre und die unseres seligen Vaters.
Und was genau gedenkt ihr zu tun, wenn er unterliegt?
Welch hoher Besuch! Was verschafft mir die Ehre? Seit Menschengedenken ziehen fränkische Könige gemeinsam in die Schlacht. Und auch wir beide haben auf dieses heilige Gesetz unsere Treue geschworen.
Wenn dir dieses Gesetz so heilig ist, lieber Bruder, dann mach es so wie ich. Schick deine Kriegerfürsten wieder nach Hause.
Um aller Welt einen Grund zu geben, über uns zu lachen. Du hast mir deinen Beistand zugesichert. Hast du das vergessen?
Nun, ich habe mich eben eines anderen besonnen. Auf dein Wohl, Bruder. Du wirst die Schmach schon überstehen.
Elender Verräter.
Siehst du, du hättest genug Kraft, mich sogar zu töten. Allein der Mut dazu, der fehlt dir.
Es bleibt unklar, warum. It remains unclear why Carloman refused to help. Did he want to put his brother into a difficult position? Did he have an alliance with Aquitaine? Maybe there were old hostilities between him and his brother. The sources don't really make it clear, but it's certain that after the quarrel between the two, Charlemagne was on his own.
Charlemagne was in the trap his brother had laid for him. Calling off the military campaign would have been a display of weakness. Risking it on his own would have been a huge gamble because Charlemagne couldn't afford a defeat. A king only remains king when the luck of battle and therefore God is on his side. Maybe Charlemagne threw himself into such an adventure with confidence because he possessed the latest weapons and technology of war. That at least is suggested by a valuable document in the monastic library of St. Gallen. It's one of the oldest and largest libraries in the world. A precious manuscript from the time of the Carolingians is kept here. The Golden Psalter, written in gold ink. It depicts the Franks attacking with bows and arrows, and also armed with swords and shields. The soldiers are wearing chainmail and scale armor for protection, highly sophisticated equipment for the time.
This army that Charlemagne fields is well equipped, and more importantly, the part of the army which the enemy sees first is an iron army. It is terrifying.
An experiment will reveal the speed and penetrative power of an arrow. The arrow is filmed with a high-speed camera for this purpose. A soap torso with a density comparable to that of the human body will serve as a dummy. The distance between the archer and the dummy is exactly 10 meters. At 3,000 frames per second, the camera records the bow shots.
Bisher auf dem Torso auftrifft.
So what do we have for the speed of the arrow now?
Well, we calculated the 45 meters per second for the arrow, and this translates to 162 kilometers per hour.
That's fast.
What protection did the chainmail and scale armor afford? Were they the real secret weapon of the Frankish army?
The mail armor, which is the most important form of armor that they used at this time, made of interlocking rings, was primarily designed as a protection against swords, spears, cutting weapons. It was not very effective against arrows, as we see in our tests, but it will stop some arrows.
The chainmail alone rarely wards off arrows, but it reduces the impact so much that the deadly arrowhead can be stopped safely by the doublet below. Even arrows are thwarted by the Frankish scale armor, however. In staggered columns, the Frankish army penetrated deep into the Aquitaine territory, defeating the enemy warriors, usually through fatal attacks on the flanks.
That causes the military successes of Charlemagne is in fact quite simply money. He rules over a state with an expanding economy. This economy has industry, small industry but important because it enables them to manufacture large quantities of weaponry and armor.
Ihr habt einen Sohn. Eure Gemahlin hat euch einen Sohn geboren. Wir haben einen Thronfolger. Wir werden die Franken sein, die alle Teile kriegen.
After this victory, Charlemagne declared the whole of Aquitaine his, thereby annexing the area his brother Carloman had originally possessed.
Charlemagne legitimized his reign through his successful military campaign. He showed his entourage that he was a soldier king who could be victorious, and that's always good for him as king. His brother might not have thought about what would happen if his older brother won. He, as the younger brother, would be at a disadvantage. We could speculate that it would maybe have been better for Carloman to have helped his brother pacify Aquitaine.
Karl nannte seinen Sohn nach seinem Vater Pippin. Und natürlich war er überglücklich, da er damit seinen Machtvorsprung vor seinem Bruder hervorheben konnte. Aber wenige Monate später passierte etwas Ungeheuerliches. Karlman taufte seinen erstgeborenen Sohn ebenfalls auf den Namen Pippin. Das war eine große Provokation seinem Bruder gegenüber. Du musst wissen, dass Karl die Unfreundlichkeit und Eifersucht seines Bruders die ganze Zeit über mit großer Geduld ertrug. Tja, man wunderte sich sogar allgemein darüber, dass er deswegen nie zornig aufbrauste. Er regelte seine Angelegenheiten vielmehr auf seine Weise. Oder vielleicht sollte ich besser sagen, auf einmal begann seine Mutter seine Angelegenheiten zu regeln. Auf ihre Weise.
Charlemagne's mother, Bertrada, secretly made her way across the Alps to Italy. Her destination was the palace of the Lombard king Desiderius in Pavia. Bertrada wanted to forge an alliance with the former enemy of the Franks, thereby securing Charlemagne's kingdom.
The sources give us very little information about the role of women at the time, but in Bertrada's case, she developed an unusual dominance and held the strings of politics in her hands.
Verehrte Bertrada, ihr seid, wenn ich mir erlauben darf, eine wahrlich sehr bemerkenswerte Frau.
Ich danke euch, werter Desiderius. Ihr dürft unser Treffen durchaus so eröffnen. Nun, es erstaunt uns doch immer wieder, wie weit entfernt das stolze Reich der Langobarden ist. Vom fränkischen Hof.
Dann sollten wir endlich etwas dagegen unternehmen. Wenn ich euch vorstellen darf, meine Tochter.
This princess was to marry Charlemagne, thereby making the Lombards allies and putting pressure on his brother's realm, controlling him from the north, south and west. That was the plan. The only problem was that the Pope was distrustful of the allegiance between Rome's archenemy, the Lombards, and its protector, the Franks. Pope Stephen III believed the hand of the devil was at work in Bertrada's plan. He wrote directly to the king of the Franks.
Schon im Paradiese hat sich der Satan eines Weibes bedient, um zur Übertretung der göttlichen Gesetze zu verleiten. Dieses Mittels bedient sich derselbe jetzt wieder. Dieser Heiratsplan ist eine teuflische Eingebung. Das edle und herrliche Volk der Franken darf sich nicht durch die Verbindung mit den stinkenden Langobarden beflecken. Der heilige Petrus selbst beschwört den fränkischen König, bei dem schreckvollen Tag des letzten Gerichts nicht die Tochter des Langobardenkönigs zu heiraten.
But Bertrada asserted herself. Charlemagne divorced his wife, Himiltrud, and banished her to a life in a convent, as was customary for such cases at the time.
Über Himiltrud wissen wir leider sehr wenig. Wir kennen auch
Unfortunately, we know very little about Himiltrud. We don't even know the family she came from, but it's likely that this family wasn't very powerful because we know nothing about a protest against Himiltrud's banishment, which took place even though she had given Charlemagne a son by the name of Pepin, the later Pepin the Hunchback, And the sources also contain no information about what happened to Himmeltrud after her banishment.
Verschweigen, was aus ihr geworden ist.
Karl, deine Braut hat einen langen Weg hinter sich und möchte dir ihre Aufwartung machen.
Ich hoffe, eure Reise war nicht zu beschwerlich. Ich erwarte euch zum Abendmahl.
That marriage to the Lombard princess seemed very useful. The Lombard king had married off his daughters to other prestigious people, and Charlemagne was sort of buying into an already existing constellation of power.
It was Carloman's move.
Ich weiß jetzt, was zu tun ist. Unser zweiter Sohn soll die heilige Taufe vom Papst persönlich empfangen. Schon morgen schicke ich eine Anfrage nach Rom.
Seine Heiligkeit wird dem sicher zustimmen. Und ihr werdet ein neues, starkes Bündnis besiegeln.
Doch Karl und insbesondere Bertrada wollten es nicht zu einem Bündnis zwischen Karlmann und dem Papst kommen lassen. Und dazu kam es auch nicht. Denn was soll ich dir sagen? Schon wieder begann Bertrada, ihre Fäden zu spinnen. Und schließlich zog sie den Papst auf ihre Seite. Karlmann soll darüber so erbost gewesen sein, dass er sogar plante, gegen Rom zu marschieren.
Gegen die Stadt des Apostelfürsten Petrus wollte er zu Felde ziehen.
Ganz recht. Und in diesem Fall wäre es sicherlich zum lange schon drohenden Bruderkrieg gekommen. Aber die Vorsehung sollte anders entscheiden. Gottes Wege sind manchmal wahrhaft unergründlich.
Before war could break out, fate intervened. At the young age of 20, Carloman died under mysterious circumstances. For Charlemagne, the death of his unloved brother opened up unforeseen opportunities.
Gebe vor allem auf unsere beiden Söhne Acht. Und hüte dich von meinem Bruder. Du darfst nicht zulassen, dass er ihnen die Krone entreißt.
Charlemagne would soon declare himself sole ruler.
Carloman's unexpected death was a gift for Charlemagne. I'm not entirely sure it was all above board, but speculation is one facet of historical work. The other is the certain statements of our witnesses. And they don't permit any suggestion of any intervention by Charlemagne with regard to his brother's death.
Carlomagne's widow, Gerberga, formulated a daring plan to prevent Charlemagne from getting his hands on her sons as she fled across the Alps. Her destination was, of all places, the court of the Lombard king Desiderius.
Gerberga fled to Italy, presumably because she hoped that, protected by the Lombards, she would be able to get away from her ever more powerful brother-in-law. But she was seriously wrong. It took Charlemagne 2 years to march to Italy, but then all hope was lost for all of Carloman's heirs.
The days at court were also numbered for Charlemagne's Lombard wife.
Kommt deine Gemahlin nicht?
Sie hat schon viel zu lange an meiner Tafel gesessen. Ich habe einen Fehler gemacht. Ich hätte dieser Ehe niemals zustimmen dürfen.
Mit der Familie deiner Frau haben wir einen starken Verbündeten an unserer Seite. Was soll das also bedeuten, Karl?
Das bedeutet, dass ich als König aller Franken von nun an meine Entscheidungen alleine treffen werde. Und deine Langobardin geht zu ihrem stinkenden Volk zurück.
Charlemagne returned to the politics of his father and turned away from his mother's politics, although we don't know what Charlemagne's opinion about it actually was up until 771. He was able to act differently because things changed so fundamentally as a result of Carlomagne's death.
Bist du dir nicht im Klaren darüber, dass das Krieg mit Desiderius heißt?
Dann wird es wohl so kommen. Hat nicht mein Vater schon gegen die Langobarden und für den Papst gestritten?
Zeiten deines Vaters sind vorbei. Wir brauchen keinen Krieg, sondern Allianzen, Karl.
Das siehst du falsch, Mutter. Aus welchem Grund ist denn meine Schwägerin zu Desiderius geflohen? Sie denkt doch, dass er ihren Söhnen, und zwar hinter meinem Rücken, zur Krone verhelfen wird.
Ich glaube nicht, dass es die Absicht deiner Schwägerin ist.
Der Krieg, Mutter, hat schon längst begonnen. Und du wirst nicht mehr mitentscheiden.
His relationships with Italy were changing. He wanted an alliance with the papacy, and he wanted to break with the Lombards. But he also needed to marry a woman of the aristocracy, which was much more normal than a foreign marriage. He wanted to marry into a powerful family who would provide military and political support for him.
And so Charlemagne married Hildegard, the daughter of a count from an aristocratic Alemannic family. He'd long since sent his Lombard wife back to her father. During the following 11 years of marriage, Hildegard gave birth to 9 children.
Zum einen hatte Hildegard Verwandte im Reich.
Hildegard had relatives in Carloman's realm, which meant that her father was a great support for Charlemagne with regard to Carloman's territory. In addition, Hildegard, who was 14 at the time, must have had a very special charm. because she managed to reconcile the enemies of this marriage at court and to become a very popular queen, as far as we can tell.
The Lombard king Desiderius, humiliated by Charlemagne, went to Rome to play his last trump.
Eure Heiligkeit, ich vermute, ihr habt vom Ungemach gehört, das Karlmanns Söhnen widerfahren ist.
Ihr meint, dass unser, mit Verlaub, etwas ungestümer Karl die armen Knaben in der Thronfolge übergangen hat?
Er hat sie ihrer rechtmäßigen fränkischen Krone beraubt.
Nun, welche Rolle obliegt mir in diesem Spiel?
Eure Heiligkeit, mit Verlaub, ihr seid der Einzige, der über die Rechtmäßigkeit der Krone verfügt. Ich bitte euch, salbt jene Knaben zu den rechtmäßigen Thronfolgern Karlmanns. Sie sind seine Söhne.
Und wie ich gehört habe, habt ihr sie in eurer Obhut und wollt einen Vorteil daraus ziehen? Gut, ich werde darüber befinden. Doch solch ein Urteil braucht Zeit.
Sicherlich war es eine Herausforderung. It would have been a big challenge to Charlemagne if the sons of his deceased brother had been given a legitimation by the Pope. He couldn't put up with that. After his brother's death, he claimed to be the sole ruler of the Frankish Empire. That the Pope might possibly give others a legitimation to the Frankish throne was definitely a reason for him to intervene.
War für ihn sicherlich ein Grund zum Eingreifen.
In May 772, war with the Lombards seemed inevitable. But Charlemagne's behavior towards his brother's sons had angered many princes in the empire. The situation was tense when Charlemagne asked them to attend the military review, as he did every year.
Fürst Gerold, der getreue Gefolgsmann meines Bruders.
Und nun wie Gottes wollte der eure.
Und dazu mein neuer Schwager. Kommt, lasst uns keine Zeit verlieren. Wie ich sehe, sind unsere Reihen nicht geschlossen. Das betrübt mich. Besonders wenn fränkische Fürsten ihre Loyalität nicht ihrem eigenen König, sondern einem dreckigen Langobarden angedeihen lassen. Aber die Langobarden sollen uns jetzt nicht kümmern. Kümmern wir uns lieber um die Sachsen.
When Charlemagne sent his Lombard wife back home, he knew that it would mean war with the Lombards. He also knew that there would be resistance to a war with the Lombards in his own ranks. From his mother, for example. He had to get rid of that resistance so the Franks could fight the Lombards. Being the soldier king that he was, he used the interim period for a campaign against the Saxons, because a king of that time always had to be at war. That was his main job.
Charlemagne's father, Pepin, had also fought against the Germanic Saxons. Now the son was taking over. For years, the Saxons had been invading the north of the Frankish Empire. But unlike his father, Charlemagne went a step further when he decided in 772 to advance with great brutality into Saxon territory, all the way to the upper Weser River.
The fight against the Saxons, who, in contrast to the Franks, weren't Christians, meaning they weren't baptized, must have had a religious undercurrent right from the start. Religion was part of the political ethnic identity that had to be broken if necessary, if such a people were to be subjected, for example. Military submission and the assertion of Christianity in Saxony were inseparable for Charlemagne. They were two sides of the same coin for him.
Who were these Saxons, and where did they live? It is said the imposing Eckstern stones in the Egger Hills were a cult site of the Saxons, who as Germanic pagans worshipped their gods with animal sacrifices. Physicist Clemens Voda is trying to find out whether these man-made caves really were used by the Saxons in Charlemagne's day.
Ich würde sagen, hier an der Stelle müssten wir sehr gute Chancen haben, direkt oberhalb dieser Absprengung, wo hier die Verfärbung am intensivsten ist, wenn wir genau hier reingehen.
Ja, gut. Hast du auch genug Licht? Ja.
Traces of a fire were found here years ago. The question now is, when was there fire here? Clemens Voda is hoping to get an answer by using thermoluminescence dating. He's taking a sample to the laboratory. There aren't many records about the Saxons' religious rituals, but fire was considered sacred in all heathen cults, as was the blood of the sacrificial animals with which the priests tried to placate the angry gods. Clemens Voda is dating the sample with the optically stimulated luminescence. That allows him to determine when the quartz grains in the stone were heated for the last time. It takes many days to prepare the sample and perform the measurements. The results reveal that the fire in the caves of the Eckstern stones must have burned between the 8th and the 16th centuries, thus including the period of the Saxon-Frankish Wars. Whether they really were ritual fires can't be determined anymore, since there are no further archaeological clues. But there are further clues around the Eckstern stones which suggest that this place had a special significance. Many believe that the legendary Irminsul could have stood here during the time of Charlemagne. The Irminsul was the most important object of Saxon worship. It is said to have been a massive tree that supported the heavens. A Christian relief was carved into the exterior wall of the main cave in the 16th century. It depicts a deposition from the cross. The relief contains a striking, unusual detail. It's a forked branch that resembles the descriptions of the Irminsul. Does the relief contain a clue about whether the most sacred Saxon religious object once stood here? That would explain why Charlemagne fought such a bitter war for this territory. The person who had control of the sacred Saxon site, Charlemagne hoped, would also be in control of the Saxons. He had no idea that this fight would go on for decades. During his military campaign, Charlemagne reached the Saxons' most sacred site, the legendary Irminsul. a potent tree which, according to their beliefs, bore the weight of the entire universe.
Bringt die Fackeln.
Mein König, mit Verlaub, diese Stele ist das höchste Heiligtum der Sachsen. Die Irminsul ist die direkte Verbindung zu ihren Göttern. Sie ist keine kleine, von Menschen erbaute Kirche, die wieder aufgerichtet werden kann.
Every war had to be legitimized, and the destruction of the heathen object of worship helped a great deal with the legitimation strategy. Charlemagne's concept right from the start was to weaken paganism, to exterminate paganism, and introduce Christian altars, Christian churches, and Christian religious organizations into the country. This quick victory and the quick conquest of Irminsul helped him with that, of course.
Brennt sie nieder.
Right from the start, Charlemagne's campaign against the Saxons was also motivated by acquiring booty, to boost the mood of his warriors and princes. He found a secret sacrificial cave in the Saxon forests.
What the Franks well knew was the shrine of the Saxons, where you would get a large amount of gold and silver. Charlemagne needed a quick injection of loot, of plunder, in 772 because he was trying to build up his own power with a view to getting his nephews back from Lombardy. Everywhere was always connected. These different theatres of war were always connected.
At the same time, far away from Saxony, Pope Adrian made a far-reaching decision.
König Desiderius, ihr kamt zu mir mit der Bitte, die Söhne des verschiedenen Karlmanns als seine Nachfolger zu fränkischen Königen zu salben. Nach reiflicher Prüfung sind wir zu der Überzeugung gelangt, so wahr uns Gott helfe, dass die Krone über das Reich Karlmanns nur einen rechtmäßigen Erben haben kann, König Karl. Wie wir Sachsen hören, führt er das Schwert Gottes wie kein Zweiter.
Und dennoch ist König Karl ein Thronräuber, Eure Heiligkeit. Seid ihr euch eurer Entscheidung sicher? Auch im Hinblick auf die Sicherheit Roms.
Wollt ihr mir etwa drohen, lieber Desiderius? Mein Entschluss ist unumkehrbar.
Meister, stimmen denn die Berichte, dass Desiderius in seinem Zorn sogar Rom angegriffen hat? Meister? Meister? Meister?
Ja. Papst Hadrian war schwer in die Enge getrieben. Er hat Desiderius mit dem Kirchenbann gedroht, aber das half nichts. In seiner Not hat er König Karl um Hilfe gebeten. Notiere, Johannes. Schon Karls Vater Pippin hatte auf Gesuch des Papstes einen Feldzug gegen die Langobarden unternommen. Nun hatte Karl zur Kriegserklärung den gleichen Grund. Allerdings war der jetzige Feldzug mit größeren Schwierigkeiten verbunden und nahm auch einen anderen Ausgang.
It's likely that in 773-774, the decision to pursue the Lombards was by no means unanimous. Charlemagne's sister-in-law, Carloman's widow, was in Lombard kingdom with her children, and they must have had a certain following among important Franks. I would say the war against the Lombards would have required more groundwork among the Franks than a summer campaign against the Saxons, which could be started relatively risk-free.
Mein König, verzeiht. Ich bin gerade erst unterrichtet worden, dass ihr hier seid.
Ich kam auch unangekündigt.
Was verschafft uns die Ehre eures Besuches? Ihr habt Fragen.
Ihr könnt gut in der Seele eines Menschen lesen.
Nun, seit der Beisetzung eures Vaters wart ihr nicht mehr hier. Und nun, da ein Krieg ins Haus steht, sucht ihr diesen Ort auf. Da muss man nicht viel lesen können in der Seele eines Sohnes. Eure Situation ist wirklich äußerst kompliziert. Schon euer Vater hat die Gunst vieler Fürsten verloren, als er gegen die Langobarden zog.
Aber er hat den Feldzug gewonnen.
Euer Vater hatte keinen konkurrierenden Thronfolger am Tisch der Langobarden sitzen. Die Söhne eures Bruders haben hierzulande viele Freunde.
Ich hätte sie gar nicht außer Landes lassen dürfen.
Gott wird deine Milde lohnen, mein Sohn.
Aber ich kann Desiderius nicht einfach so gewähren lassen. Das wäre ein fatales Zeichen meiner Schwäche.
Ja, ihr müsst Wohltaten folgen lassen. Das ist wohl wahr. Aber wählt eure Taten mit Bedacht. Nutzt die Schwäche eures Feindes. Desiderius ist wahrlich nicht dumm, aber man sagt, er sei über alle Maßen selbstverliebt. Spielt mit seiner Überheblichkeit. Schickt eure Armee über die Alpen und dann verhandelt mit Desiderius.
Verhandeln?
Gebt ihm das Gefühl, ihr hättet Angst vor ihm. Tut so, als ob ihr eine Schlacht unbedingt vermeiden wollt. Dann wird er Fehler machen. Glaubt mir. Nichts ist wirksamer, als dem Feind Schwäche vorzuspielen.
Und was ist mit unseren wankelmütigen Fürsten?
Nun, für einen Feldzug, bei dem kein Langobardenblut vergossen werden soll, für einen solchen Feldzug werdet ihr genug Fürsten finden. Und wenn ihr erst einmal unterwegs seid und Desiderius eure Friedensangebote ausschlägt, dann ist vieles möglich.
Ihr hättet wahrlich Feldherr werden sollen.
Feldherr oder Waffe, beide führen wir Menschen in die Schlacht. Nur dass sich die Schlachten ein wenig unterscheiden.
By the summer of 773, the military campaign against the Lombards was agreed. Charlemagne crossed the Alps in two separate formations. He sent one down the Aosta Valley, while leading the other personally across Mont Cenis. The two armies were to join to the west of Turin in the Susa Valley. That was the plan. The army numbered more than 3,000 men. The regular soldiers were joined by around 1,000 courtiers. Early medieval vehicles had no suspension. They were just simple carts, and they were just for women and children. That meant a significant exertion for Queen Hildegard. It was important to Charlemagne that she accompany him, and she followed him on his Italian campaign, highly pregnant and in freezing temperatures across the Alps.
Hildegard couldn't have had an easy life at Charlemagne's side because he always wanted her to accompany him, so that she was with him on most of the campaigns, even though she was usually pregnant. First, she was there on the Lombard campaign to Pavia. She followed Charlemagne across the Alps in winter, together with her eldest son and her stepson, Pepin.
Ihrem ältesten Sohn und ihrem Stiefsohn Pippin.
Crossing the Alps was a life-threatening adventure in the early Middle Ages, especially when snow and ice blocked the way in the wintertime. According to legend, only a miracle saved the Franks from certain death after bad weather took them by surprise. A further legend recounts that Charlemagne had a church built out of gratitude for his miraculous survival in the dangerous gorges. The small church of St. Benedict in Mael Venosta is one of the few surviving monuments from the Carolingian era. Its donor had himself immortalized in a fresco. That's the only way we know what Frankish nobleman wore. He's holding a richly adorned sword in front of his body. Much speculation has gone into his identity. The suggestions range from a nobleman in the king's entourage all the way to Charlemagne's son, Pepin. The march across the Alps took weeks. As expected, Desiderius rejected an offer of peace. Charlemagne's plan seemed to be working, and his warriors had a strategy.
During the Lombard campaign, the first problem was circumventing the famous chasms. There are sources claiming that one Frankish regiment went around the chasms to attack the Lombards from behind. Charlemagne's quick invasion of northern Italy can only be explained by assuming he got some of Desiderius's followers onto his side. He could have bribed them, or it was all to do with his strategic skills.
Vielleicht lag es aber auch an seinem strategischen Geschick.
The Lombards wanted to attack the Franks in the gorge from above. They had no idea that a second Frankish contingent would attack them from behind over the mountain ridges. Taken by surprise, Desiderius had to flee with his army behind the high walls of his capital, Pavia. In awe, a chronicler later reported the arrival of the Frankish army at Pavia. Finally, the Iron Charlemagne himself appeared. The iron filled the entire plain and threw back the shine of the sun. But the Lombards didn't surrender, and finally Charlemagne decided to besiege Pavia, a daring undertaking so close to winter with an uncertain outcome.
He must have planned such a siege right from the start, because otherwise it wouldn't have been possible. A siege takes a long time, 3/4 of a year, over winter. It started in September and ended in June. That means he had to make logistical and technical preparations.
To keep his nobility in good spirits, Charlemagne frequently put on parties in the wintry encampment.
Ja, komm her.
Eure Schwester hat Fieber.
Und wann kommt das Kind?
Gott allein befindet darüber, wann das Kind zur Welt kommen wird. Mach dir nicht so viele Sorgen um mich, Bruder. Mir geht's gut.
Du solltest nicht hier sein.
Ich bin die Königin. Es ist meine Pflicht, an der Seite meines Gemahls zu sein.
Wir sollten alle nicht hier sein.
Teurer Schwager, was lässt dich so ungehalten unsere Feier stören?
Mein König, für die Kirche und den Papst eine Schlacht zu schlagen, gibt euch noch lange nicht das Recht, der Sünde zu frönen.
Klingt aus.
Nur ein guter Christ wird diese Schlacht gewinnen. Und ich vermag keinen hier zu sehen. Während ihr euch hier vergnügt, gebärt meine Schwester euch unter Schmerzen im Nachbarzelt ein Kind.
Übertreib es nicht, Schwager. Sei kein Spielverderber. Trink einen Becher mit uns.
There's an English proverb, there's no smoke without fire. I think in this case that contemporaries were surprised at Charlemagne's, the number of mistresses that he had. And you don't have to wait for even 10 years after his death before there are rumours that Charlemagne is in hell having a bad time, specifically having his genitals gnawed at by a beast to punish him for, well, it's fairly obvious what he's being punished for.
The siege of Pavia went on without progress. Then Charlemagne surprisingly went to Rome to have an audience with the Pope. It was the first time he'd seen the Holy City.
Es gab sicherlich von Seiten Karls eine...
Charlemagne will have been excited to see what this city looked like, because we know from the early Middle Ages that the people from the north were really interested and excited to travel to Rome because of the large stone buildings they'd heard of and that they didn't have back home.
Große Steinbauten, wie sie aus ihrer Heimat sie überhaupt nicht kennen.
Pope Adrian I must have been surprised by Charlemagne's visit, according to the sources, and even more surprised by how humbly and deeply moved the King of the Franks behaved.
Charles needed something like a miracle. And he appears in Rome, and Charlemagne slowly ascending, kissing the steps as he goes up, and then embracing the Pope and leading him, his left hand in the Pope's right hand, leading him into St. Peter's. I think that this must have been an extraordinarily powerful experience, and that then going into the shrine of St. Peter, feeling the spiritual power, the heat of the shrine, if you like, was something that he would never have forgotten.
Charlemagne wanted the papal blessing for his Lombard campaign, and he delved deep into his pockets to get it. Following the tradition started by his father, he presented himself as the patron of the church and renewed a generous promise of a donation.
ein wesentlicher Grund des Rombesuchs.
A major reason for his visit to Rome was that Charlemagne wanted to request the support of Saint Peter and his successor for his military action against the Lombards.
Anders kann man sich auch nicht erklären, dass dann bereit ist, mindestens.
That's the only explanation for why he was willing to give this, at least temporary, promise of a donation, to give the conquered territories that had belonged to the Lombards until then to St. Peter.
Als Eigentum übergeben werden sollen.
When Charlemagne returned, plagues and famine had forced Pavia to capitulate.
Gelobt sei Jesus Christus.
Und alle Heiligen dazu.
Siehst du, Gerold? Nun waren doch wir die besseren Christen.
In der Tat, mein König. In der Tat.
I think for Charles, this encounter with the saint was the miracle. And it enabled him to go back and finish the war. In real life, what really enabled him to finish the war was that a terrible plague broke out in Pavia and the Lombards were decimated by illness. But in his mind, he had formed this protective relationship. He protected St. Peter and his lands, but St. Peter was his protector from now on. And every subsequent triumph in his reign, I think, was a vindication of that belief.
Karl ließ nicht locker, bis Desiderius durch eine lange Belagerung gezwungen hatte, sich bedingungslos zu unterwerfen.
Und was wurde aus König Desiderius?
Sei nicht so ungeduldig, Johannes. Schreib weiter. Der langobardische Feldzug endete also mit der Unterwerfung Italiens, der lebenslangen Verbannung des Königs Desiderius, der Vertreibung seines Sohnes Adalgis aus Italien und der Rückgabe der von den langobardischen Königen geraubten Güter an Hadrian, den Papst der römischen Kirche.
Gerberga and her sons, the rightful successors to Carloman, fell into Charlemagne's hands as a result of the Lombard defeat. Frankish soldiers led them off into exile.
Historians can ponder what happened to these two boys, Charlemagne's nephews. Since we have no record of what happened, it's likely that Charlemagne wanted and accelerated their deaths. We don't have proof of this. The Carolingians, unlike the Merovingians, tended not to kill their enemies anymore, but it can't fully be ruled out.
Aber ganz auszuschließen ist es auch nicht.
Charlemagne had been successful. From that point on, he was allowed to style himself Rex Francorum et Langobardorum, King of the Franks and the Lombards. As a result, he controlled the whole of Western Europe, but he was still a far cry from peace.
Mein König, die Sachsen haben sich unter der Führung Widokins erhoben. Überall wurden christliche Kirchen niedergebrannt.
Meine Krone.
After the victory over the Lombards, Charlemagne turned his attention to Saxony again. He acted in a new way. He was so brutal that the Anglo-Saxons believed he had lost his mind. This shows that maybe Charlemagne couldn't cope as well with setbacks as one might believe from Einhard's account.
Wie man das vielleicht nach den Ausführungen Einhards glauben mag.
Charlemagne's counterattack was relentless and cruel. The warriors under the Saxon leader Widukind didn't stand a chance against the superior Frankish forces.
Gott sei meiner armen Seele gnädig. Wasche mich rein von meiner Missetat. Reinige meine Seele.
Charles certainly wanted to convert the Saxons to Christianity. He was serious about that. And part of that package was that they would swear oaths of loyalty to him. And once they'd sworn those oaths, if they then rebelled, they were regarded as perjurers and traitors. And so any kind of retaliation was justified. And some pretty horrible things happened. But I think in Charles's mind and in the mind of contemporaries that breaking your oath to the king was something that you just couldn't do.
Charlemagne's bitterest enemy was the Saxon leader Widukind.
Bei allen Göttern schwöre ich, Widukind. Das räche ich.
Widukind,
who became Charlemagne's great enemy for a few years, was a Westphalian nobleman by origin, who became the driving force of the resistance to the Franks from 778 onwards. Widukind went a little bit against his aristocratic peers, who came to arrangements with Charlemagne quite easily. So he became the leader of the middle and lower classes among the Saxons. If he had been successful, then he could have founded a Saxon kingdom.
Dann hätte er ein sächsisches Königtum begründen können.
Kennst du das Sprichwort, das die Griechen geprägt haben? Der Franke soll dein Freund, aber nicht dein Nachbar sein. Vor der Stärke und Entschlossenheit des großen Karl zitterten damals alle. Und zu Recht. Als er nach den Langobarden die Sachsen besiegt hatte, stürzte er sich umgehend in das nächste Abenteuer. 30 Jahre wird das so weitergehen. Und er wird fast ununterbrochen Krieg führen. Aber jetzt genug davon. Lass uns zum Gastmahl bei unserem Freund Absantor aufbrechen. Ich habe Hunger.
Ja, ich auch.
Confident of certain victory against the Saxons, Charlemagne went to the winter camp.
Hör zu, mein getreuer Roland. Zeig, was du kannst. Du bist mein bester Krieger. Mein Glücksbringer. Hä? Mein König. Alle wissen, dass ihr unbesiegbar seid. Lasst Gnade walten. Was ist los? Hast du keinen Mumm? Hat der Krieg dich weich gemacht? Bist du ein Schwächling?
Du siehst müde aus.
Mir wurde die Bitte vorgetragen, den Statthalter von Saragossa im Kampf gegen den Emir zu unterstützen.
Ein Feldzug gegen den Emir von Cordoba.
Saragossa will unabhängig werden. Der Statthalter wird mir die Stadttore öffnen. Und ich werde im Kampf den Sieg davontragen.
Karl, deine Untertanen, deine Krieger, selbst deine Fürsten. Sie alle sind des Krieges müde und mit Verlaub. Ich bin es auch.
Around 1,700 kilometers separate Saragossa from Paderborn. Adding up the distances covered on the way to his military campaigns and royal palaces, Charlemagne will have ridden around the globe more than once in his lifetime.
Medieval rulers were always on the move because the communications at the time meant that the ruler had to show himself in the different regions of his kingdom in order to be taken note of. That was the case during the first half of Charlemagne's reign. He also had military considerations, and in such a kingdom you had to expect that a peaceful journey would turn into a punitive expedition against someone who had to be brought to reason.
Den man zur Raison bringen wollte.
Ich bin am Ende meiner Kräfte. Aber ich sorge mich vor allem um dich. Karl, du hast dich so verändert. Der Karl, der mich geheiratet hat, war, weiß Gott, kein zahmes Lamm. Aber er war nicht blind vor Schlachtengier und er wäre nicht in diesen ungewissen Krieg gezogen.
Liebste Hildegard, ich habe keine andere Wahl. Und ich gehe im Namen des Herrn.
Ich bitte dich, hör auf mich, kehr um.
Gott wird mich schützen. Du brauchst mich nicht weiter zu begleiten. Ich lasse dir ein paar Soldaten zu deinem Schutz für die Rückreise.
When Charlemagne finally reached Saragossa, the situation there had changed completely. The governor who'd asked him for help against the Emir of Cordoba had been deposed. The city gates remained closed to the Franks. Charlemagne refused to give up. He besieged Saragossa for months, but to no avail. It was the first defeat of his military career.
Es ist wahr. Die Soldaten sind schwach. Seit Wochen gibt es nicht mehr genug Proviant und Wasser. Viele sind bereits erkrankt und ein Aufruhr ist nicht mehr...
Schweigt, Markgraf Roland! Was erlaubt ihr euch?
Ist die Lage wirklich so aussichtslos?
All unser Proviant ist aufgebraucht. Und auch in der Umgebung ist nichts mehr zu holen. Selbst eure Fürsten sehen keine Möglichkeit mehr, die Belagerung weiter aufrechtzuerhalten.
Ich danke dir für deine Offenheit, mein Freund. Aber sag mir, wo ist mein Glück geblieben? Verkündet für morgen den Rückzug. Ihr, Roland, werdet auf unserem Marsch die Nachhut sichern.
On his return from Spain, Charlemagne gave an order with major consequences. He attacked Christian Pamplona and allowed it to be plundered. With his brutal assault on the Basques, Charlemagne triggered a retaliatory attack. Basque warriors attacked the Frankish rearguard in the Pyrenees and killed them all. For Charlemagne, the death of Margrave Roland marked the bitter end of his Spain adventure.
The attack on the Basques was an attack on Christians. They presumably avenged themselves because Charlemagne, after having failed in Saragossa, plundered Pamplona on his return. That was a terrible thing to do. He plundered a Christian city and the Basques sought revenge.
A contemporary said that this was a terrible defeat, that it cast a terrible cloud over his soul from which he could never recover. Why was that so? I think he lost the plunder which had been captured in these cities, and that was, in a sense, the economic point of the campaign. But even more important, some of his closest companions, of whom one was Roland, had been killed. And I think for Charles that was a terrible loss of face, loss of honour, that his closest men, the ones he trusted, they died for him.
Der Spanienfeldzug, das bleibt unter uns, war ein Debakel. Hat man je von Fehltritten römischer Cäsaren gelesen? Nein. Und auch ich werde nichts dergleichen tun. Niemand ist unfehlbar, Johannes. Auch der christlichste aller Herrscher, unser hochverehrter König Karl, nicht. Und meine Aufgabe ist es doch, der Nachwelt sein Leben als Vorbild zu hinterlassen. Ich werde also schreiben: König Karl überquerte die Pyrenäen und eroberte alle Städte und Burgen, die er belagerte. Dann kehrte er ohne Verluste um. Auf dem Rückmarsch musste er allerdings doch noch die Treulosigkeit der Basken erleben.
Einhard will have intended to report Charlemagne's life accurately. I don't know any issue where scholars today could say, that's not true, that's a lie. But like everyone who writes about history, he selected the material the way he wanted to present it.
Hat den Stoff natürlich so ausgewählt, wie ihn darbieten wollte.
He understandably tended to portray Charlemagne in as good a light as possible.
Günstiges Licht zu rücken. Hat eine gewisse Verehrung für Karl den Großen.
He venerated Charlemagne, and that guided him. But there are no breaches of truth.
Gegen die Wahrheit gibt es nicht.
Charlemagne's defeat in the Spanish campaign wasn't just kept quiet or reinterpreted by Einhard. Others even turned the ignominy he suffered in the Pyrenees into a hero's epic. One example of that is the Song of Roland. The 13th century Stricker manuscript, now kept in St. Gallen in Switzerland, illustrates the story. The precious miniatures depict the events like in a picture book. Margrave Roland's horn Oliphant, with which he desperately wanted to get Charlemagne's help, became legendary. But all help came too late, and the king was only able to mourn the death of his friend. The oldest and most important written version of the Song of Roland is in the 12th century Oxford manuscript. It's the original text of the famous epic. Dr. Wolf Steinsieg has translated it from Old French and interpreted it.
Charlemagne isn't a shining hero in The Song of Roland. The text says he's a 200-year-old ruler surrounded by young, dynamic princes. It says he kept getting into difficult situations where he got frustrated and cried and was in despair. Then he turned to God and got help. The Song of Roland ends, "How laborious my life is." So he's no shining hero. The entire text is a heroic song, the victory of Christianity over the unbelievers, and the victory of the loyal over the traitor.
While Charlemagne was still on his return from Spain, a new rebellion erupted in Saxony. This time, the guerrilla fighters under the Saxon prince Widukind defeated the Frankish occupiers. Widukind increasingly became Charlemagne's nightmare.
Kein anderer Krieg ist von den Franken mit ähnlicher Ausdauer, Erbitterung und Mühe geführt worden wie dieser. Er hätte zweifellos früher beigelegt werden können, wenn dies bei der Treulosigkeit der Sachsen möglich gewesen wäre.
Nur zu, Meister Johannes. Sprecht ruhig weiter.
Es lässt sich kaum beschreiben, wie oft die Sachsen besiegt wurden und sich flehentlich dem König unterwarfen, wie oft sie Gehorsam versprachen, gelobten, den Götzendienst aufzugeben und das Christentum anzunehmen. Doch hatten sie es meist auch ebenso eilig, das Versprochene nicht zu halten. Hier waren wir stehen geblieben.
Dann schreibt weiter. In diesem Krieg fielen zahlreiche fränkische und sächsische Adelige, darunter die höchsten Würdenträger.
Todesstrafe erleidet der nach heidnischem Brauch Leichen bestattet, indem er den Körper den Flammen preisgibt. Sterben soll, der einen Menschen dem Teufel opfert und nach heidnischer Sitte den Götzen als Opfer darbringt.
Sterben soll, wer gewaltsam eine Kirche erstürmt oder in Flammen aufgehen lässt. Sterben soll, wer einen Bischof, einen Priester oder einen Diakon tötet.
Karl der Große sah sich nach der Niederlage des
After the defeat by the Saxons in 782, Charlemagne was confronted with a big problem. Many Franks had fallen, and he now faced pressure to legitimize what he was doing. When he did achieve a victory, he took the very draconian measure, allegedly, of having 4,500 Saxons put to death.
4.500 Sachsen hinrichten.
Charlemagne made an example of hitherto unparalleled ruthlessness. He forced the surrender of Saxon leaders, then had them beheaded and thrown into the river Aller in the town of Verden.
Ob es 4.500 gewesen sind,
A difficult passage in the kingdom's annals states that it was 4,500. But that's doubtful, because it's really a very large number. And we've seen that medieval sources exaggerate the figures in military events.
Übertriebene Zahlen genannt werden.
But it can't be denied that such a bloodbath took place, and that the number of victims must have been significant.
Von Opfern gegeben hat.
Willst du dein Leben retten? Dann sag mir, wo ist euer Anführer? Wo ist Widukind? Schert!
Charlemagne considered Widukind a big problem. Widukind kept waging war successfully against the Franks, but whenever Charlemagne himself showed up, Widukind withdrew from further confrontations. This behavior will have impacted on Charlemagne personally. He felt challenged and insulted.
Durch diese Art der Kriegsführung.
Charlemagne still hadn't found a way of breaking the tough resistance of the Saxons.
Karl, du hast ein großes Reich geschaffen. Größer als dein Vater es vermochte. Doch öffne deinen Blick und dein Herz und suche einen anderen Weg. Den führst du weit und nur stuhl das Schwert. So wird unser stolzes Reich zugrunde gehen. Und du mit ihm, mein geliebter Sohn.
Charlemagne's mother, Bertrada, and his wife, Hildegard, died in the same year. Charlemagne ruled out his son from his first marriage, Pepin the Hunchback, as heir to the throne in favor of Hildegard's sons.
Charlemagne was definitely someone who we can't relate to. That's because of his personal attitude to life and the juxtaposition of the very brutal actions he performed as a ruler and the great personal charm and charisma which he undoubtedly must have possessed.
Karl war von hoher Gestalt. Seine Augen waren sehr groß und lebhaft. Die Nase etwas lang. Auch war sein Nacken zwar etwas dick und kurz, Und sein Bauch trat ein wenig hervor. Doch fielen diese Fehler bei dem Ebenmaß seiner Glieder nicht sehr auf. Seine täglichen Mahlzeiten bestanden aus 4 Gängen. Und Fleisch aß er lieber als alles andere. Ärzte hasste er, weil sie ihm vorschrieben, dass er das Bratenfleisch aufgeben und dafür gekochtes Fleisch essen sollte. Er beklagte sich oft darüber, dass das Fasten seiner Gesundheit schade.
Auch ihr könnt ruhig besser auf eure Gesundheit achten, Meister Einhard.
Einhard's statements are the only contemporary descriptions of Charlemagne's appearance. The only other information about the real stature of the Frankish king comes from his mortal remains in his shrine in Aachen Cathedral. The shrine was opened in 1988 for research and restoration purposes. Joachim Schleifring was the anthropologist charged with making an assessment. At the time, the conclusions were merely drawn from the bone's appearance. The strong bone structure and a large diameter of the pelvis were striking. 2 long bones suggested a height of more than 1,80 meters. Various ossifications indicated an age at death of 60 to 70 years.
It surprised me, given what we know about Charlemagne's age, that his skeleton was in a condition that I'd describe as top fit for his advanced age. He had very few degenerative changes in his knee joint and heel bone. There were no indications of breaks or injuries. His skeleton was in surprisingly good shape for his age. He was an athletic man of above average height. His bones were quite robust.
The emperor's cranium is also in Aachen's cathedral treasury and can be examined. The sutures confirm Charlemagne's ripe old age of 66. That means he exceeded the average life expectancy of a Frank in the early Middle Ages by 37 years. By performing a medical analysis on his shin bone in the treasury, the scientists have completed the initial findings about Charlemagne's size and health. The chemist Bernhard Blumisch and the medical expert Frank Röhrli performed bone density measurements and magnetic resonance imaging.
The examinations of Charlemagne's shin bones yielded various results, and that allows us to get a better picture of him. We can reconstruct his height, and we believe he was around 1,84 meters, which is tall for that time, but not abnormally tall. He was slender, not very robust.
He
also had a very well-preserved interior bone structure. The computer tomography reveals a relatively healthy bone without major pathologies.
1,200 years after his death, modern medicine has confirmed that Charlemagne was in rude health. Just a few months after Hildegard's death, Charlemagne married an East Frankish noblewoman named Fastrada. She was described as clever and self-confident and made quite a few enemies in the male-dominated society. At the same time, in Saxony there was fighting yet again.
Seht es mir nach, dass ich euch mitten in der Nacht rufen ließ, Meister Alcuin.
Mein König,
Ich quälen Fragen. Ist diese Welt denn eine gerechte? Erfüllt sich in ihr ein göttlicher Plan? Und der Tod sagte, gibt es nicht jenseits des herrlichen Seins das trübe Nichts?
Das Nichts, werter König, braucht euch nicht zu kümmern. Alles ist von Seiendem erfüllt, wohlgeordnet, immerwährend und durch nichts zum Stillstand zu bringen. Dem Herrschenden kommt es zu, gemäß dieser göttlichen Ordnung zu handeln und das Reich gemäß der kosmischen Gesetze zu lenken. Nirgendwo ist nichts und nichts geht je verloren. Und nicht immer ist Gewalt der richtige Weg, Gottes Ratschlüsse für die Ewigkeiten durchzusetzen.
Karl der Große rechnete fest mit dem
Charlemagne was firmly expecting the Last Judgment, and like most of his contemporaries, he was probably scared of it. He knew that every person would stand alone in front of his judge, and he knew that a king would also be punished for the sins of his subjects. That's scary. I think Charlemagne will have been scared about death. And that a lot of the energy to reform his realm came from this fear.
Aus dieser Angst heraus zu verstehen ist.
In 785, Charlemagne had a meeting with his greatest opponent, the Saxon leader Widukind. It was the first time the two had come face to face.
Die mittelalterliche Gesellschaft ist, so sagt man, eine agonale Gesellschaft.
Medieval society was a society where everything was focused on competition. The aim was always to subordinate the competitor. If he surrenders voluntarily shortly before defeat, he is entitled to be spared.
Wenn sich freiwillig ergibt,
mein König.
Erhebt euch, Herzog Widukind.
Gelobt du in Gott, allmächtigen Vater.
Ec gelobo in Gott, allermächtigen Vater.
Widukind had himself baptized, and Charlemagne was his godfather.
Gelobst du in Heiligen Geist?
Ec gelobo in Heiligen Geist.
Charlemagne's acting as godfather to Widukind was an act of friendship, of friendliness and recognition. It's paying tribute to the defeated, if you will.
The long-term story was a successful one. The Saxons who had never been very different from the Franks, except in terms of religion and not having kings. That was important. But their material culture was very similar to that of the Franks. They understood each other, literally understood each other. So but they integrated. And Einhard says that the Franks and the Saxons became one people.
Widukind's price for peace was high, and despite the empty state coffers, Widukind's conversion to Christianity was worth several precious items to Charlemagne. The Museum of Decorative Arts in Berlin has one of them, the Börse. It's said to be one of the baptismal gifts given to the Saxon prince by Charlemagne.
Charlemagne waged the war against the Saxons under the motto, baptism or death, and Widukind chose baptism. That means he forswore all further resistance and subordinated himself to Charlemagne. That he got something from Charlemagne in return is also true. In some sense, he was a victor, because he got his Saxon estates back and was able to return home after he'd spent a long time away.
Charlemagne and Widukind forged a peace treaty with which the Saxon nobility grew more influential in the Frankish realm. The leader of the rebels was later glorified as a mythical being. As an advocate of Christianity, Widukind is said to have founded Enger Abbey in Westphalia. It's believed that this is also where he found his final resting place. The chiseled tombstone depicts him in the regalia of a priest-king. The Saxon wars exhausted the Frankish realm. There were frequent rebellions that Charlemagne put down brutally. It took a long time to realize that it would take more than tough action and oppression to obtain the loyalty of his new subjects. The Frankish Empire achieved hitherto unknown dimensions during Charlemagne's reign. It became the superpower in Europe. Even the powerful Duchy of Bavaria was annexed, along with parts of the Avar kingdom in the east. Furthermore, most of the bordering regions were politically dependent on the Franks.
These days we see Charlemagne as the father of Europe, or one of the fathers of Europe. But politically, you can't transfer the term Europe to the time of the Carolingians. Even though poets sang hymns of praise about Charlemagne at the time and called him the beacon of Europe, this was always a purely geographical term. Charlemagne got his name because he ruled over the largest part of the Christian West.
In order to rule over his huge realm, Charlemagne was always on the go with his entourage. Unlike Hildegard, Queen Fastrada usually remained at court to support Charlemagne from there. The two were in constant contact via the Royal Military Postal Service.
Ordne bei Hofer eine Litanei mit Fastmann. Seit meiner Abreise von Regensburg habe ich keine Nachricht mehr von dir erhalten. Ich sorge mich daher sehr um deine Gesundheit. Möge es dir gut gehen. Ich grüße dich sehr. Im Namen des Herrn.
Schatzmeister Nikolaus, ihr habt nicht wie seit
During Charlemagne's absence, Fastrada was in charge of business. It's a responsibility Charlemagne wouldn't have given his previous wives.
Auch in Verzug, wie mir berichtet wurde. Warum sind die Leute aus Reims noch nicht da? Wo bleiben die Steinmetze?
Fastrada is the only wife of whom a letter from Charlemagne to her survives. And again, it's a letter that's couched in in terms which are affectionate, but which also imply how politically important she was.
Charlemagne's third wife, Fastrada, who presumably wasn't as young as Hildegard when she married Charlemagne, seems to have been more important to him politically. He included her more than he did Hildegard. We know that she's mentioned in the Capitulare de Villis, and she was to be kept informed about the proceeds of the royal estates, just like the king. Einhard, who evidently didn't like her, blames her for the rebellion of Charlemagne's eldest son, Pepin the Hunchback.
Der König stimmte oft den rücksichtslosen Handlungen seiner Gemahlin Fastrada bei und schien von seiner sonstigen Güte und Milde in ungewohnter Weise abzuweichen. Diese Königin, der Karl so freie Hand ließ, habe ich nicht mehr erlebt. Sie verstarb noch, bevor ich zu Aachen an den Hof kam. Damals war ich so alt wie du jetzt, Johannes.
The palace in Aachen had become the main royal residence when the young Einhard came to court. Charlemagne surrounded himself with European scholars in Aachen. Einhard was the only Frank among them.
Charlemagne took advantage of different political opportunities to attract scholars from other countries to his court, or to impose on them a stay at his court. I'm thinking of Paul the Deacon. But he also had a definite policy of attracting scholars. There's Alcuin, for example, who became one of the most outstanding scholars of the Frankish world.
Willkommen im Reich der Gelehrten. Ich bin Osulf. Du musst Einhard sein?
Ja, Einhard vom Kloster Fulda. Abt Baugulf hat mich geschickt.
Ich habe gehört, du warst ein Musterschüler. Da, das ist der große Alcuin von York. Von nun an dein neuer Lehrmeister. Da, der weißhaarige alte Fuchs, das ist der Langobarde Paulus Diaconus. Angilbert, der Galan der Königstochter. Da, der dichtende Westgote Theodulf und Adalhard von Corbie.
Charlemagne wanted to use the scholars to advance the culturally backward Frankish Empire by implementing an educational reform.
Even before Charlemagne, important people realized that the formal education, mastery of the Latin language, the ability to read and write Latin texts had suffered greatly in the Frankish realm. The Anglo-Saxon missionaries in the mid-8th century were the first to realize this.
Sind Pioniere für diesen Gedanken gewesen.
The first efforts to remedy the situation occurred under his father, Pepin. But Charlemagne really focused on it, and I think it's one of his most significant achievements that he felt he could fix this decline in education. Not by relying on the Franks alone, but by getting the support of educated foreigners.
Diese Abschrift in Kirchenlatein wird an einen bayerischen Priester gehen. Bonifatius hat berichtet, dass der aus Unkenntnis in nomine Patria et Filia et Spiritus Sancti getauft hat.
Im Namen Vaterland und Tochter und des Heiligen Geistes.
Amen. König Karl war außer sich. Und die bayerischen Priester sind nicht die einzigen, die des Lateinischen nicht mächtig sind.
In the early days of Charlemagne's reign, the various scripts within the Frankish kingdom were quite different. That's why Charlemagne, who wanted to send out his decrees in writing all over the realm, was interested in having a uniform, simple, easily legible alphabet. And this was then implemented.
One of the most important achievements of the educational reform came from Charlemagne's highest court scholar. The Alcuin Bible, written in Carolingian minuscule, the new script of small letters. This made a joined-up, simple way of writing possible for the first time. It's the precursor of our current writing. The oldest surviving book in the German language also mentions Charlemagne's campaign for better education in the Frankish kingdom. The Codex Abrogans was a first dictionary of terms used in Church Latin. Priests and lay people were to really understand what Christian texts talked about.
One of the greatest achievements we can attribute to Charlemagne and his court scholars, because you always have to see him together with his entourage, is his educational reform, which is also known as the Carolingian Renaissance. It expresses Charlemagne's desire to improve knowledge of writing and the Latin language.
De produire de beaux manuscrits, de mieux maîtriser la langue latine.
And so the Carolingian Renaissance was a firm part of Charlemagne's government program and his social reform.
De gouvernement de Charlemagne et de la réforme de la société.
In September 796, Charlemagne's son, Pepin, returned victorious from his campaign against the Avars in what is now Hungary.
Vater. Endlich, mein Sohn. Wie ich sehe, haben sich die Awaren in deinem Antlitz verewigt.
Das war die Sache schon wert. Warte, ich habe dir etwas zu zeigen.
Charlemagne gave his son Pepin the supreme command in the Avar campaign. That was definitely a test, and Pepin passed this test with flying colours. The victory against the Avars was a huge success. The booty was plentiful, and it greatly increased Charlemagne's standing.
Es gibt 7 Wagen voller Gold. Und das ist nur der Teil, der dir gebührt. Auch unsere Fürsten sind reich beladen heimgekehrt.
The Avar treasure gave Charlemagne the means to implement his visions. He founded bishoprics all over his empire and made them centers of his educational reform. He also planned the construction of a magnificent residence in Aachen.
Die christliche Religion, mit der Karl seit seiner Kindheit vertraut war, hielt er gewissenhaft und fromm in höchsten Ehren. Deshalb erbaute er die wunderschöne Kirche in Aachen, die er mit Gold und Silber, mit Leuchtern und mit Gittern und Türen aus massivem Metall ausschmückte. Das war eine wunderbare Zeit damals. Das solltest du eigentlich alles mitschreiben, Johannes. Hm? Für diesen Bau ließ der König Marmor und Säulen aus Rom und Ravenna bringen, wie er sie sonst nirgends bekommen konnte. Ich glaube, es war seine Absicht damals schon, wie ein römischer Kaiser zu leben. Das brauchst du jetzt aber nicht aufzuschreiben. Der Papst selbst hatte ja das wertvolle Baumaterial bewilligt. Der Mutter Gottes und unserem König zur großen Freude.
The palace was by far the most elaborate building of the Carolingian era. A royal hall as the seat of government, a garrison and courtrooms, and the still extant octagon, a magnificent palace chapel based on the Roman Byzantine model. Even 200 years after its construction, the church dome was to be the highest north of the Alps. The symbolism of the central building speaks for itself. An octagon as a representation of heavenly Jerusalem. That was how Charlemagne expressed his entitlement to rule the whole world. Placing the throne on the gallery put the king in the most elevated position, into a special sphere. By the 15th century, it had been the coronation throne of 31 German rulers.
The
palace chapel, the octagon, which still exists as Aachen Cathedral, was influenced by a model in Ravenna. That's evident, but it's not at all clear how much he copied Roman buildings in general. There are certain documents, but they're by no means clear. During the reign of Charlemagne, Aachen fulfilled a part of what Rome once meant to the Roman emperors. But Aachen wasn't some kind of replica of Rome in Charlemagne's day.
The stormy days of Charlemagne's youth were behind him. Now he focused more on seeking insights and gathered the leading scholars of Europe in Aachen to create philosophical circles. The participants called themselves after ancient and biblical role models.
Flaccus, der getreue Priester der ewigen Glückseligkeit in Christus, entbietet dem geliebtesten Herrn, König David, seinen Gruß.
Seid ebenfalls gegrüßt, großer Alcuin. Ah, da sind ja auch Homer und Nadulus. Alcuin, was sagt ihr heute über die Stellung der weltlichen und geistlichen Herrschaft?
3 Ämter gelten heute auf der ganzen Welt am höchsten. Das eine ist die Würde des Papstes in Rom. Das andere ist die kaiserliche Würde von Byzanz. Und das dritte ist die königliche Würde, in die euch, mein König, Gottes Wille als Leiter des Christentums eingesetzt hat. Schon heute ist eure Macht hervorragender als die aller anderen.
Fürwahr. Und ich weiß zu schätzen, dass eure Worte nicht die eines höfischen Schmeichlers sind. Und ist es Gottes Wille, lieber Alcuin, so werde ich den Weg zum höchsten Amt weltlicher Macht mit eurer Hilfe gern beschreiten.
Charlemagne's plans have to have come together a while before the year 800. The first signs of them can be found in the royal annals, if you just look at who Charlemagne was communicating with at the time. Suddenly, from 797, all the great rulers are suddenly gathered around. Not just the emperor in Byzantium, the caliph in Baghdad, the emir in Cordoba, but also the lesser rulers, even from North Africa and Italy. Suddenly, everyone's represented. Within the next 5 years, they're all listed in the royal annals. That's a ruler acting like a world ruler.
In April 799, an incident occurred in Rome that Charlemagne used to his political advantage. The Pope was physically attacked. Men from his closest circle were involved. They accused Leo III of fornication, adultery and perjury. In addition, he wasn't from Roman aristocratic circles. They abducted the Pope and wanted to make him unfit to hold office by blinding and mutilating him. But things didn't turn out that way. A loyal servant helped the Pope escape to the care of royal Frankish messengers, who led him across the Alps to the only conceivable place of refuge, to Charlemagne, the patron of the Roman Church. The trip across the Alps took 8 weeks. Then the Pope, accompanied by Charlemagne's messengers, reached the royal palace in Paderborn.
The meeting took place in Paderborn, far in the north, and Charlemagne definitely didn't hold it there at random. He wanted to demonstrate to the Pope what he had done for Christianity, for the spread of Christianity. That's why the meeting took place in newly conquered Saxony.
When Leo III arrived, Charlemagne let him feel his power.
Hoheit, ihr beliebt zu scherzen. Es käme mir niemals in den Sinn, in eurer Gegenwart zu scherzen, allerheiligster Vater. Noch dazu in solch brisanter Sache.
Ihr rettet mich aus den Fängen dieser Bastarde, nur um dann über mich zu richten? Hoheit, ihr seid der von Gott befohlene Schutzpatron der Kirche. Ihr könnt mich doch nicht diesen Verbrechern wieder ausliefern.
Mir steht wahrlich nicht der Sinn danach, euch auszuliefern. Ich strebe einzig und allein nach Wahrheit und Gerechtigkeit. Und der kann nur in Rom Genüge getan werden. Bitte, erhebt euch, allerheiligster Vater. Sollten die Vorwürfe, die jene Verbrecher, wie ihr sie nennt, gegen euch erhoben haben, haltlos sein, so werde ich alles tun, um euch in Rom wieder einzusetzen.
Die Vorwürfe gegen mich sind haltlos.
Dann, heiligster Vater, habt ihr auch nichts zu befürchten.
There are historians who suspect that this whole story was staged by Charlemagne so that he could present himself as emperor in Rome. I personally don't believe that. Charlemagne had had far too many successes already. The most recent success against the Avars in 795 made him the indisputable ruler of the West. He controlled all the old imperial residences in the West, including Rome. And I can't believe that such a man didn't have the idea all on his own, I want to be emperor.
Nobody in Rome suspected what Charlemagne really wanted to achieve as supreme judge, namely to acquit the Pope in a proper trial. To do that, he cleverly used a legal dodge.
Soll nun Recht gesprochen werden. Und wie es sich gehört, werden wir uns in diesem Fall dem alten Grundsatz beugen, der da lautet: Papa anemine judicatur. Über den Papst darf nicht gerichtet werden. Schweigt! Über das Schicksal von euch Aufrührern befinde ich später. Heiliger Vater, seid ihr bereit, vor Gott, der Heiligen Schrift und eurem Gewissen einen Eid abzulegen, der bezeugt, dass jene Vorwürfe des Meineids und des Ehebruchs, die euch vorgeworfen werden, nichts als Lüge sind?
Bei allem, was mir heilig ist, ich bin unschuldig. Und hiermit reinige ich, Leo, Bischof der Heiligen Römischen Kirche, von niemandem verurteilt oder gezwungen, mich vor eurem Angesicht und schwöre vor Gott, dass ich die verbrecherischen Dinge, die jene mir vorwerfen, weder selbst vollbrachte, noch durch andere vollbringen ließ.
Leo III, reinstated as the Pope, was to show his gratitude to Charlemagne the next day.
Nun, König Karls letzte Reise nach Rom hatte mehrere Gründe gehabt. Die Römer hatten Papst Leo schwer misshandelt und er hatte den König um Schutz gebeten. Daher begab sich Karl nach Rom, um die verworrenen Zustände der Kirche zu ordnen.
Und um sich dann zum Kaiser krönen zu lassen.
Ja. Bei dieser Gelegenheit erhielt er den Kaiser- und Augustus-Titel, der ihm anfangs so zuwider war, dass er erklärte, er würde die Kirche selbst an jenem hohen Feiertage nicht freiwillig betreten haben, wenn er die Absicht des Papstes geahnt hätte.
Einhard
reported on Charlemagne's coronation as emperor in a very strange way. He doesn't say when it happened. He doesn't say where it happened. He just said that Charlemagne had said later that if he had known of the Pope's intentions, he wouldn't have gone to church that day, even though it was an important holiday. He probably didn't entirely like the pivotal role of the Pope, because the Franks generally felt far superior to the Romans. The interpretation that emerged for Charlemagne's court was that he only got the imperial title, the nomen imperatoris, for something he had already achieved under his own steam. That's probably the context of that story.
On Christmas Day 800, Charlemagne became Augustus Imperator Romanum, the noble emperor of the Romans. This act was to change the history of the world. From this point on, the Pope would crown emperors for centuries.
The events of Christmas Day had far-reaching consequences. That's when the medieval empire was founded, which was to continue in the form of the Holy Roman Empire up until the year 1806. At the same time, this empire was closely tied to the papacy, even though Charlemagne mightn't have intended this.
Charlemagne never returned to Rome. He started focusing on domestic politics. To secure the future of his huge empire, he implemented reforms. He put uniform laws in place. The silver denarius was introduced as the empire-wide currency. The cultivation of grains and fruits was to be improved. Charlemagne issued economic regulations that he put into effect on all his royal estates. As part of his comprehensive educational program, Charlemagne made schools accessible to lay people. His maxim was, first comes knowledge, then action.
Charlemagne considered it his duty to guide his people to salvation. He had a Catholic and also a completely pragmatic understanding of his rule. His capitularies addressed moral aspects, since it was his God-given responsibility to make sure his entire people achieved blessedness.
Puisque lui-même est responsable devant Dieu de
There's no doubt about it in the Admonitio Generalis. It was his job to lead his people to salvation.
Son rôle est de conduire son peuple au salut.
Karl musste in seinem Leben viele Schicksalsschläge hinnehmen. 4 seiner Söhne und eine seiner geliebten Töchter starben. Und er hat viel Tränen um sie vergossen. Denn seine Vaterliebe war für alle seine Kinder sehr groß. Unser Kaiser Ludwig war sein letzter verbliebener Sohn, der für die Thronfolge in Frage kam. Er hat ihn schon zu Lebzeiten zum Mitkaiser gemacht. Und diesmal verlief die Krönung nach seinem Plan. Kein Papst und kein Bischof. Er selbst hat als Demonstration seiner Allmacht seinem Sohn die Krone aufs Haupt gesetzt. Bald darauf kam es zu den seltsamsten Vorzeichen. Ein gewaltiger Blitz hat damals in das Dach unserer Kirche eingeschlagen und die goldene Kugel auf der Spitze zerschmettert. Hinzu kam, dass der Palast in Aachen häufig erschüttert wurde und die Dächer der Gebäude, in denen Karl sich aufhielt, beständig knackten. Mehrere Monate bevor er starb, bemerkten einige Leute an der Wandinschrift im Dom, dass das Wort Prinzeps so verblichen war, dass man es nicht mehr lesen konnte.
Und was tat der Kaiser daraufhin?
Karl hielt nichts von diesen Vorzeichen. Jedenfalls tat er so, als gingen sie ihn nichts an.
Charlemagne died of pneumonia when he was 66. After a reign of 46 years, he left his son Louis a huge empire. As Emperor Louis the Pious, he would continue his father's reform policies, but he wouldn't be able to maintain the unity of the Frankish Empire. Just 30 years later, the empire fell into 3 parts. West Francia, East Francia, from which a German empire emerged, and Middle Francia, which would later split further.
Was ist groß an Karl?
But what's great about Charles? There have always been conquerors, but it has to be said that despite the empire's domestic difficulties after Charlemagne's death, especially during the reign of his son, Louis the Pious, during which there was inner conflict, the empire stuck together. He understood how to organize his empire so that it stood as a whole. A certain feeling of unity, of us, developed. The Saxons felt part of this us, as did the Lombards.
Ich selbst halte seine Bedeutung für die Erneuerung der geistigen Kultur.
I personally consider the renewal of intellectual culture as outstanding. He called it reparare, to renew, to repair, to restore. He restored the intellectual culture, Latin, the sciences, to understand faith properly, and this restoration of science continued to have an effect. It was a restoration of logic, of reason, of rational thinking, and that was incorporated into European society for the next 300 years, until it was so deep-seated that it changed the world.
Charlemagne was buried in Aachen. Some say he was cruel and power-hungry, Others praise him as being wise and agreeable to God. One thing that's certain is that as the first emperor of the medieval West, Charlemagne shaped an entire era. He ruthlessly forged an enormous empire with his sword, but he also made it flourish culturally. Even his contemporaries stylized him as a figure of light, while one created a literary monument for him.
Irgendjemand hat diese Geschichte einmal erzählen müssen.